Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Commander Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the Turtle Power Precon from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set. Let's get into it. Really fast, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we use here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is that we will either be using the primary or the backup commander. Next, we have a cap of around $100 or less that we use when choosing the upgrades. We will be adding 10 cards and we will be removing 10 cards. Additionally, we add a few more upgrades that we like to call no budget options near the end of the video, and that's for people who might already have the cards or maybe have a little bit extra in their budget. And lastly, we do use market value pricing provided by TCG Player at the time of recording, which is displayed at the bottom of the screen when we discuss the cards. So the commander we will be discussing today is Leonardo the Balance. For 3 colors and a white, we have a 3/3 legendary creature Mutant Ninja Turtle that has, when a token you control enters, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Do this only once each turn. And then you can also pay Wooburg. Creatures you control gain Menace, Trample, and Lifelink until end of turn. And he also has Partner, Character Select. You may have 2 commanders if both have this ability. So right out the gate, Leonardo is a Wooburg commander that cares about token generation so that he can make all of our creatures stronger by putting +1/+1 counters on them. Leonardo's first ability says when a token you control enters, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This ability triggers only once each turn, which is extremely important. That means that this deck isn't about creating as many tokens as possible all at once. It's more about creating tokens consistently across the turns so that we can repeatedly trigger that ability to grow our board. If we are able to reliably do this, we are going to scale up our board in a way that will become very difficult for our opponents to deal with. Leonardo's second ability gives us a built-in game finisher. For Wooburg, our creatures gain Menace, Trample, and Lifelink until end of turn. That means once our board has grown large enough through repeated +1/+1 counters being put on them, we just have a built-in overrun ability on our commander. Now Leonardo has Partner, Character Select, which means we do get to choose a partner commander. So we do have 5 other partner commander options that we can choose to go with Leonardo. However, in my opinion, without really having to do a full overhaul for this deck, the best option is Michelangelo the Heart. Michelangelo is a strong partner for Leonardo because he provides consistent, repeatable token generation that's tied to combat. So whenever we attack, he will create a food token, which will trigger Leonardo's once per turn +1/+1 counter ability. That means as long as we continue to keep attacking with creatures, we're steadily scaling up our board. I also like that he comes down earlier than Leonardo so he can start generating tokens right away and really ensure that Leonardo gets value the turn that he enters. So the way we're going to want to upgrade this deck is by adding more cards that increase our +1/+1 counter output. We also want to add ways to repeatedly create tokens even on our opponent's turns in order to reliably trigger Leonardo as much as possible. And lastly, because this is a 5-color deck, we are going to want to add some cards that can help us color fix our mana and ramp. A special thanks to all of our channel members. Your support truly means a lot and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to show your support and get access to some exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. You can also support the channel by liking, subscribing, and dropping a comment. Thank you. And now let's get back to the video. So we've now made it to the additions portion of the video, and we're going to kick things off with Damning Verdict. For 3 colors and 2 white, we have a sorcery that says destroy all creatures with no counters on them. So Damning Verdict is an incredible board wipe in this deck because it's almost always going to be one-sided in our favor. Leonardo and the other supporting cards are constantly putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures, so that means most of our board will survive this. Meanwhile, all of our opponent's creatures that don't have any counters on them will be destroyed. Next, we have Hardened Scales. For 1 green, we have an enchantment that says if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So Hardened Scales is one of the most efficient upgrades we can add to the deck. Since Leonardo puts counters on each creature we control when a token enters, Hardened Scale will turn that into 2 counters instead of 1. I also like that it comes down early, coming in at just a single mana, and it also works really well with the mutagen tokens that this deck also creates. And here we have our next addition. We have Illustrious Wanderglyph. For 4 colorless and a white, we have a 2/2 artifact creature golem that has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. Other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. So when we are looking for cards that are repeatable token generation, this is exactly what we're looking for. This will create a 1/1 gnome artifact creature token at the beginning of each upkeep, which means that we can trigger Leonardo on every turn cycle. Seeing how his ability is only once per turn, this will give us a steady stream of tokens that we need to buff our team. Once we have the City's Blessing, it also buffs our artifact creatures, which this deck does have. Not to mention the gnomes that they are creating are also artifact creatures, so they will benefit from it as well. Next up, we have Kami of the Whispered Hopes. For 2 colorless and a green, we have a 1/1 creature spirit that says, if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. You can also tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is Kami of Whispered Hope's power. So this card is another excellent addition for any +1/+1 counter deck. With that first ability, it's just like Hardened Scales. It's going to increase the number of +1/+1 counters we're getting to add, which again means anytime Leonardo's ability triggers, or if we crack any mutagen tokens, they're going to be even stronger. On top of that, as Kami continues to grow with these counters, it turns into a massive mana engine. Its tap ability scales with its power, which means the bigger it gets, the more mana it will produce. In a 5-color deck, this can be really great for our color fixing and overall ramping potential. Next up is Kutzil Malamet Exemplar. For 1 colorless, a green and a white, we have a 3/3 legendary creature cat warrior that says, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So Kutzil is a great support piece in this deck because he will protect our explosive turns and rewards us for doing what Leonardo already wants us to do. Since Leonardo and other cards are putting +1/+1 counters on our creature, they will naturally have a power greater than their base power. That means once we're able to start connecting in combat, Kutzil will turn those attacks into card draw. On top of that, shutting our opponents out from casting spells on our turn protects our board, and to make sure when it's time to activate Leonardo's big finisher, it doesn't get interrupted. Here we have Mutagen Man, Living Ooze. For X and 2 green, we have a 2/3 legendary creature Ooze mutant that has Trample. Activated abilities of artifact tokens you control cost 1 less to activate. When Mutagen Man enters, create X mutagen tokens. So the reason this card is a strong addition is because it gives us scalable token production and direct counter synergy all in one card. When it enters, it creates X mutagen tokens, which if Leonardo is out, obviously will trigger that one time it happens. Additionally, that reduction to the cost of activated abilities of artifact tokens we control is also a big deal. That doesn't just apply to the mutagen tokens, it also discounts clues, food, and any other artifact tokens that we're running that have activated abilities. That added efficiency can really add up over the course of a game. However, because this card can create a lot of mutagen tokens, the biggest upside is that the mutagen tokens now cost 0 mana to activate. That means we can convert them into +1/+1 counters for free. Or if we have something like Hardened Scale or a similar ability on the battlefield, those free counters scale even more. This creature also comes with Trample, so as we continue to grow its power, it becomes a very relevant combat threat. And here we have our next edition, Sphere Grid. For 1 colorless and 1 green, we have an enchantment that says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. It also has unlockability. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have Reach and Trample. So not only is this card another great way to add +1/+1 counters to our creatures, but this will also provide us some massive payoffs for our creatures having those counters on them. Giving our creatures Reach will help us block against flying threats, and giving them Trample will help us get damage through on our opponents. Additionally, getting that damage through will then trigger its first ability, which will put another +1/+1 counter on them. Here we have Tendershoot Dryad. For 4 colorless and a green, we have a 2/2 creature Dryad that has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. Saproling creature tokens you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. So for pretty much the exact same reasons that we wanted to add Illustrious Wanderglyph, we're going to definitely want to add Tendershoot Dryad. This again gives us that repeatable token engine that Leonardo really wants. It will create a Saproling at the beginning of each upkeep and not just ours. Not to mention, if your opponents don't do anything about this creature, your sapperlings will just continue to get bigger, not only from the City's Blessing ability that this card has, but from all the +1/+1 counters Leonardo is putting on them. Next on our list, we have the Cabbage Merchant. For 2 colorless and a green, we have a 2/2 legendary creature, Human Citizen. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, create a food token. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, sacrifice a food token. Tap 2 untapped foods you control, add 1 mana of any color. So the Cabbage Merchant is a great support piece for this deck because again it will give us token generation on our opponent's turns without us really having to do anything. Every time our opponents cast a non-creature spell, we're going to get a food token, and because it's a token, we're triggering Leonardo. On top of that, food tokens are great for gaining some life, especially in emergency situations, and with the Cabbage Merchant out, we can then tap those lands instead for a mana of any color, which is really great again for helping us color fix in a 5-color deck. Lastly, I want to point out that we do have other ways to create food tokens in this deck, Michelangelo the Heart for example, so we can definitely find ways to leverage the mana ability that it has. And here we have the last of the additions. We have the Ooze for 2 colorless. We have a legendary artifact that says, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it leaves the battlefield, create a mutagen token for each +1/+1 counter on it. It also has a tap ability that says, exile target card from a graveyard, create a mutagen token. So the Ooze is a great inclusion for this deck because it will let us essentially recycle our +1/+1 counters instead of losing them. Whenever a creature we control with counters on them leave the battlefield, we're going to get mutagen tokens equal to the number of counters it had. That means all of the +1/+1 counter scaling that we've been using Leonardo to do doesn't get wasted. Instead, it effectively gets banked into mutagen tokens that we can convert back to +1/+1 counters later. Additionally, if Mutagen Man happens to be on the battlefield at the same time this card is, those mutagen tokens will cost 0 mana to activate. Also, don't sleep on that exile target card from a graveyard ability. That can be really good for sniping out powerful cards out of our opponent's graveyards, which can really set them back depending on their deck strategy. We've now made it to the removals portion of the video, and we're going to kick things off with Electric Seaweed. For 2 colorless and 2 red, we have a 0/4 creature plant wall that has Defender and Haste. When this creature enters until end of turn, whenever another creature dies, this creature deals 1 damage to each non-wall creature. You can also tap it, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. So Electric Seaweed doesn't really advance our primary game plan, which is that we're really just trying to scale up our creatures using +1/+1 counters and winning through combat. Not really chip away with any of the ping effects it has or any of the sort of death chains that this thing can do. It also has Defender, so it's really not contributing towards our offense. Also, for 4 mana, we would rather have cards that generate tokens, enhance our counters, protect our board, or help us win through combat, and this card just doesn't move us in any of those directions. Our next removal, we have Endless Foot Assault. For 2 colorless and a white, we have an enchantment that has Squad. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When this enchantment enters, create that many tokens that are copies of it. Whenever you attack, for each opponent, create a 1/1 black ninja creature token that's tapped and attacking that player. Now, while Endless Foot Assault does make tokens, this is not the type of token production that we're really prioritizing with this upgrade. Again, with Leonardo's ability only triggering once per turn, creating multiple ninjas on the same turn doesn't help us get additional +1/+1 counters. So we'd much rather run token engines that will trigger on each turn if possible to really maximize Leonardo's potential. Don't get me wrong, I really do like this card. It is one of my favorite cards from this set, but it is just better used in a different deck. Here we have Everything Pizza. For 2 colorless, it is an artifact food. When this artifact enters, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You can also pay 2 colorless and Wooburg, tap it, sacrifice this artifact. Target player gains 3 life and draws a card. Each of your opponents discard a card. This artifact deals 3 damage to any target, and put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature. Now in a 5-color deck, being able to search your library for a basic land that you need is helpful. However, this does not put the land directly into the battlefield, so it's not really ramping you. Additionally, we did add a few other better ways to color fix and ramp with our additions. Now, the activated ability on this card really fits its name. It does a little bit of everything. However, the effects are really quite scattered, and at 7 mana plus tapping this and sacrificing it, that's a massive investment for what it actually provides you. Our next removal is Game Over. For 3 and 2 black, we have a sorcery that says, this spell costs 2 less to cast if a player's life total is less than or equal to half their starting life total. Destroy all creatures. So I do want to start off by saying that I do think it is really cool that we are exploring more design space on how to make board wipes conditionally cheaper. I'm still up in the air on whether I like this particular board wipe or not. I think in most cases I would rather just run Damnation. However, I do know that that's a much more expensive card. Additionally, this Precon comes with a lot of board wipes in it, so instead of keeping all of them, we're being more selective and keeping the ones that I think will work the best for our strategy, and this one just doesn't make the cut. And next up we have Krang the All-Powerful. For 4 colorless and a blue, we have a 3/3 legendary artifact creature Utrom Robot. If a player drawing a card causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Whenever a player draws their second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Krang. So I actually really like this card. I think it is definitely a strong new card. However, it's really going to only fit in draw-focused decks. The closest thing to synergy this card has with our deck is that it actually can put +1/+1 counters on itself, but it's really not contributing towards our token generation and spreading out the counters plan. I do think that that first ability is really strong. Being able to double trigger abilities that occur when a player draws a card is an awesome and impactful ability, but just not in this deck. And here we have Marauding Mutagen, also known as Acidic Slime. For 3 colorless and 2 green, we have a 2/2 creature Ooze that has Death Touch. When this creature enters, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Now, while having flexible removal attached to a creature is nice, 5 mana is just a very steep cost to pay. There are just much cheaper options for removal that are attached to creatures, including already in this Precon. Acidic Slime was actually a pretty popular card many years ago, but the truth is it's just sort of been power crept out over the years. We also did add a few 5-drop creatures in our additions, so removing this card will really help us maintain that mana curve some. And here we have our next removal, Rat King Pale Piper. For 3 colors and a black, we have a 3/3 legendary creature Rat Avatar that has Menace. Whenever Rat King or another non-token creature you control leaves the battlefield, create a 1/1 black rat creature token. You can also pay 2, sacrifice a token, and draw a card. Now, while I do like that Rat King does have some card draw and can create some tokens, this card really lends itself to more of a sacrifice-based game plan, and that's really not what our deck is doing. We're really not trying to loop creatures dying or sacrifice our own boards for value. We're really just trying to keep our creatures on the battlefield and grow them as powerful as we can with +1/+1 counters. Here we have Tempestra, Dame of Games. For 1 and a red, we have a 1/3 legendary creature Elemental Illusion that has pay 2 and a red, tap it, sacrifice an artifact, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it isn't legendary. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. While Tempestra's ability is interesting and could be conditionally useful, I feel like you are jumping through too many hoops to actually use it. You have to first pay 3 mana, tap it, and sacrifice an artifact just to activate the ability. That's a lot of resources for a creature that will only last until the next end step. Now, if we were doing some token doubling, or we had ways to keep the token before having to be sacrificed, then maybe it could be worth it. But even then, those things would be better for a different strategy altogether. Our next removal is Thriving Grove. It is a land that says this land enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color other than green, and you can tap it to add green or 1 mana of the chosen color. So this Precon comes with 39 lands, and personally I like to run my decks closer to 37 or 38, so I feel like we can definitely afford to trim 1 land. Thriving Grove does enter tapped, and we do have plenty of other tapped land in this deck already. On top of that, this is the green Thriving Land, and we already have a strong concentration of green mana production in the deck. And we now made it to the last of our removals. We have Vanquish the Horde. For 6 colorless and 2 white, we have a sorcery that says this spell costs 1 less to cast. For each creature on the battlefield, destroy all creatures. So Vanquish the Horde is a very efficient board wipe, especially in creature heavy games, but it still destroys all creatures, including ours. And in this deck, we are really heavily invested in building up our creatures with +1/+1 counters, and wiping all of the creatures can really reset our progress. Again, since this Precon already had several board wipes, we trimmed it down to just the ones that are either one-sided or just strategically better for our plan. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a moment to give a huge shout out to our partner, the Mighty Meeple. If you're in or visiting the Concord, North Carolina area, the Mighty Meeple is the local game store to check out. Their team is friendly, knowledgeable, and always ready to help you find exactly what you need. From magic and board games to minis and more, whatever your hobby, they've got you covered. And even if you're not local, no problem. You can shop for Magic singles and other TCGs at mightymeeple.com. Thank you. And now let's get back to the video. We have now made it to the no budget options portion of the video, and we are going to kick it off with Esper Sentinel. For 1 white, we have a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. So Esper Sentinel is an incredible addition to this deck because it gives us early card advantage while naturally scaling up with our +1/+1 counter strategy. Since the +1/+1 counters will increase the power of Esper Sentinel, over time this can make it harder for our opponents to be able to pay the tax. That means the longer he's out, the more and more likely we are able to draw cards as the game progresses. And here we have our next no budget option, Smothering Tithe. For 3 colorless and a white, we have an enchantment that says, whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. Smothering Tithe is probably one of the best examples of cards that synergize with Leonardo's game plan. This is yet another piece that we can pretty reliably create a token on our opponent's turns, which will trigger Leonardo's once per turn +1/+1 counter ability. Honestly, with just a few rotations of this on the board without your opponents paying the 2, your creatures are going to be overwhelming. On top of that, the tokens it is creating are treasure tokens, which are really great in 5-color decks because they can both provide ramp and color fixing for us. And here we have the last of our no budget options. We have the Ozolith. For 1 colorless, we have a legendary artifact that says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. So this card is really a must-answer threat for your opponents. The Ozolith makes sure that our +1/+1 counters never really go to waste, because whenever our creatures with counters on them leaves the battlefield, those counters get to be stored on the Ozolith instead of disappearing. Then at the beginning of combat, we get to move all of those counters we banked on the Ozolith onto a creature if we want to. That means even if someone wipes the board or removes one of our key creatures, all of the +1/+1 counters we have been building up just goes back on another creature and becomes an immediate threat again. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $64.11. This total does not include the no budget options that we went over. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with our Magic the Gathering content. So what do you think about the Turtle Power Precon deck? Let me know in the comments below. Which partner commander would you use with Leonardo? I also happen to think April would also be a really good choice if you were able to add more mutants and other relevant creature types. Until next time, thank you for watching.